Positive reframing is very tricky.
Tell me about positive reframing before we wrap things up.
It's just being like, there's this thought in my head or there's this behavior that just happened and I'm going to reframe it to a more helpful viewpoint. And that's tricky. That takes people years of psychology practice.
Is it a learned thing?
It's a learned thing. Some people do it based off like the things around them, so the environment around them, how they were kind of taught. But for a lot of people, that's really tricky. And mood is a transient state, right? It's constantly fluctuating based off different inputs, based off, it can be as simple as menstrual cycle. Menstrual cycle can affect your mood if you're a female. So it is constantly fluctuating, and to positively reframe thoughts, a lot harder said than done. So being able to do that, good on you.
Welcome back to the Keegan and Company podcast. For those who are new to the show, my name is Keegan Hipgrave. And guys, if you haven't already, could I get you to jump over, give us a little like and subscribe or whatever platform you listen to this podcast on, whether it's Apple, YouTube, Spotify. It's a great way for us to grow the podcast, grow the platform, and just have some incredible conversations like I'm going to have today. In this conversation, I'm joined by a good friend, studying neuropsychology student, good friend, and great surfer, which is probably not going to enjoy me saying, but Elie Walsh. How are you, Elle?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for inviting me on.
I'm pumped we're doing this because every time, and also welcome to the Gold Coast, because every time we catch up, we're usually in Melbourne.
I know. And I've been here for so long as well.
How what's the plans for the trip? You're here on the Gold Coast, you got a couple of days here. What's the plans?
Surf and sunshine. Just trying to maximize what I can't really have as much as in Melbourne at the moment. It's pretty cold.
Yeah.
The ice cream headaches are not it.
Really?
Yeah.
I've surfed Torquay and Mornington a couple times, and same thing, so cold. Like crews wearing booties, gloves. Like even at Urban Surf in Melbourne when we surf, like crews wearing boots and gloves. It's bloody cold.
I know. And maybe this is just vanity, but I refuse to wear a hood. So
Really?
I will just suffer.
Imagine like your little face.
I will suffer. I look like an overstuffed cucumber in a hood. I'm not doing it. So yeah, I'm just like, I remember I got hit the other day and I went under for a little bit and I came back up, and because of how cold it was, like my vestibular balance was all over the place. Everything was like spinning, and everyone else is just, people are used to Victoria weather.
Yeah.
It's not even July yet. It's not even cold.
I know you're going to use some words today that's probably a bit over my head, so I'm going to ask you to break them down. Before we get into it, I do want to read out your bio. PhD student studying clinical neuropsychology at Monash University, examining sleep, circadian rhythms, and mental health in athletes, but also an interest in sport performance, but also brain injuries, which is very fitting with all my concussions. I remember back to how we met, right? Like it was funny. I was talking to one of our good friends, Becky Kate, because and she's an incredible golfer in her own right. And I was trying to get her on the potty, to be honest. I was having a conversation with her, telling her about like what the plans are for the podcast and what we want to be doing, and like mental health and athletes and sport. And she's just like, you need to speak to Elie. and I remember it and I think I just called you one day randomly at work. I was at work. I don't know where you're, probably at uni. And I remember just walking away from that conversation, just being like, oh, I just want to spend time with you. I just want to get to know you, right?
Yeah.
How did you get into, like, why neuropsychology? Like where did that come from?
Yeah. Oh, thanks for that. After the conversation, I was also like, oh, I love this. This is such an important platform to spread awareness and, yeah, just really normalize that. So I am honored to be here today. Why neuropsych in sport? So that's getting into neuropsych. So I went into psychology with the intention of doing neuropsych.
Is that the pathway? Like you have to do I'm guessing an undergraduate first?
Yeah, you'll have to do an undergrad in psych with an honors, and then you apply you can either go through the master's route. I went through like master's PhD, so it's kind of a combined program. So you're doing the full-time PhD as well as your clinical work and your coursework. So the reason why I went into neuropsych is I was really interested. I got injured a lot as in my adolescence. I was a bit more risk-taking. And I was really interested in how the brain kind of deals with adversity in kind of times where the stakes are really high. So there's a lot of high pressure, a lot of high stress, and sometimes it is a bit of a life or death situation. And I was also really interested in neuroplasticity at this time.
Run me through neuroplasticity.
Yeah, so it was just kind of what I was interested in was the kind of the regeneration of brain cells and how we can kind of utilize and how our brain is like a sponge. And in times of adversity, it can kind of bounce back. And I was just really interested in that based off my injuries and how I was able to bounce back. So yeah, and then through there, I found brain injuries in sports. And I guess the fascination just kind of cultivated and grew from there. And then I actively seeked out educational podcasts as well as books, information on it. And yeah, I found neuropsych and I was hooked.
It's like, it's so clear that you've obviously got a passion for it. Yeah. Like even in my role now with like talking to past players and even just people I'm curious to talk to. And you see when crew have a passion or when they really like something, they light up, you know, and they have so much energy when they speak. And I get that from you. Like every time we catch up, it's just like we could go down some like wild little rabbit holes. And I have so many questions, and I'm keen to talk about a bunch of stuff around mental health in sport, even how to optimize performance, brain health, TPIs. But it's just like you've got that passion, like you've got that there. But that obviously comes from lived experience, yeah.
Yeah, like, I'm not going to lie. It's definitely not for the faint-hearted. Like, the amount of hours I put into sometimes, like, my clinical, my coursework. Yeah, and you sacrifice a lot to do what we love. Like, I mean, it's with every profession, right? We sacrifice some things to get what we want, and those things kind of are aligned with our values. So whilst it was a long time and a lot of hard work, and it still is, and it still will be, yeah, like you said, I get so much fulfillment from what I'm doing, and I'm so fortunate for that because a lot of people can't really say that.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, let's we will dive into it all. I know we will. But before we do that, I kind of want to know what it was like growing up for you, because not originally Australian, grew up in Barbados. What was it like growing up on the island? Like, what did it look like? Can you paint a picture for us?
Yeah, I know people are going to notice my accent on the podcast. It's so funny because I feel like I've been here for so long. I sometimes forget about that aspect, but it was a really massive chunk of my life.
14 years, yeah?
I was there for ages. I didn't move back to the Sunshine Coast until I was almost 15 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, it was beautiful growing up on the island. I honestly can't complain. It still is a third world country, so with that does come challenges. So things weren't exactly, I mean, Australia is so safe, right? Being able to walk to the beach, being able to do things without asking mom or dad and not really having to look over your shoulder. That in itself is such a privilege. So I think in Barbados, that was my parents were a bit more protective. We couldn't just walk down to the beach. If I was training with running, mom had to run with me. In Barbados during that time, there's now been a lot more of a mesh between different socioeconomic statuses. So before then, it was very much you either had money or you didn't.
The pay gap's huge.
Yeah. So the divide is massive. And yeah, my parents worked really, really hard to get to where they are today. And so we went to private schools, and a lot of the other kids in the private schools were a lot more fortunate than we were. And it was just my dad was very much always trying to keep us humble. Like, even though we were there, it's remembering that this is a privilege and this is something that a lot of other people don't experience.
Is that just through conversations he would have that? Because I imagine it's probably around, like you talked about third world country, like a lot of crime around. What do you mean? Like, what do you mean?
Yeah. So yeah, I'll take a step back from that. Barbados was extremely safe compared to other islands in the Caribbean. It was one of the safer islands. Yeah. Not necessarily crime. I think it was just more skin color.
Gotcha.
Even though I am quite brown, especially for hair standards, over there I was maybe classified because I was fair skin. That was automatically associated with money.
Gotcha.
So it was not necessarily about a lot of crime, a lot of gangs. It was just more looking over your shoulder.
Sure. And then was sport always around growing up?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I've been surfing. I thought about this the other day. I was like, I should be better.
Doing a bit of reflection before the podcast.
But yeah, I've been surfing for almost 20 years now.
Wow.
So yeah, it's been a big part of my life. But I never competed in surfing. So the whole competition training within surfing, even though I've put so much hours into it, formal training was never, it was never part of it. My formal training, so you're probably going to laugh at some of the things I disclose.
Yeah. Open up, do what you need to do. I'm keen to dive into it.
So I did swim squad for a long time, which is so beneficial for my surfing because I'm now quite as strong.
Did you enjoy swim squad growing up? You can say no because I did it as well and I hated it.
Yeah, I think the reason why I didn't enjoy it so much and the reason why I actually, I guess, dropped off on all the sports that I was competing in was because it was mandatory. My parents kind of like told me this is what you have to do. I was training, competing. I wasn't like, even though I was good at it, I didn't have that natural, that natural athleticism for swimming.
I'm sure you're very humble, by the way.
But so, yeah, I think that's why I just completely decided, nope, once I did have the choice, I'm going to drop that. But on the opposite side, like with surfing, even though it was my dad's thing and he passed it on to us, it was always an option. It was never, this is what you have to do. It was more like, I'm going surfing if you want to come. Like if we are in Costa Rica on a shack somewhere, you can either go with your mother and go walking or you can come surfing. So it was always the option to actually do it. And I think because of that, because it wasn't a forced choice, that's where I fell to, because even now I'm like really stubborn and I like to make decisions myself.
I was gonna say, I was like, how does that roll into your adult life? Do you hate people telling you what to do now?
Yeah, I've definitely, my stubbornness has matured more in a proactive sense. But yeah, I'm definitely very stubborn. And I think at that age it was like, oh, this is what dad and mom's told me to do, so I don't want to do it. And I have the opportunity to, I don't know, it was more like I had the opportunity to cultivate my own love for surfing, my own need for it, my own function for surfing. What is the function of it for me? And I think that's why I kept it so long. It was just as much as it was mine, then it was like ours or his, my dad.
But I'm similar to you, forced to do swim squad. Didn't enjoy it. I was like, what? And I've said this on the podcast before. I was just like, what kind of parent would make their kid wake up at 4 a.m. to go swim 7 or 8 Ks, you know?
4 a.m. And then like 6 p.m. after school, another like an hour or two.
You're just staring at a dotted line. Like, props to the swimmers for doing it. We've had a few Olympians on with Ariane and Mac and talking to a lot of those crew, and they just like, I was like, what do you think about? Like, you must just be like solving all the world's problems in your head. It's like, yeah, we work through some stuff like when you're in there. But in comparison, like on the other side of that, I'm like, I'm so grateful that I did do that, because like I feel confident in the water.
Yeah.
I feel confident in the ocean. Like I look at, even growing up doing like high school, like crew couldn't swim. Like, and it's hard. Like, we live on the Gold Coast. Like, the beach is just there. Like, imagine like you're not going to be able to swim. I remember we were surfing a back beach, I think just out of Sydney, like south of Sydney, and we parked up. There was one of those days, you know, when you just park up at the beach like all day. You take your umbrella down, you got boards, like girls are sitting around, boys are surfing, everyone's reading. It's that vibe. And there was a crew came down, maybe 3 of them, obviously like tourists, internationals, no idea about the water. And then in full clothes, they rolled out. And this is like a secluded beach. Like, I don't even know how they got down there. And they walked down, and then we're just sort of keeping an eye on them. And then we were sitting on that beach at one point, and then one of the girls ran up to us and said, our friends can't get in, obviously just stuck in a rip. He just stepped off the ledge. And we're like, far out, man. So we ran out, and it was as easy as just like pulling them in. Like, it was very simple. But I was like, guys, if we're not here, you guys, like, one of your mates could be dead. You just got to be like a little bit more careful. Anyway, I don't know how I got down that tangent, but grateful, like so grateful.
Yeah.
Did you take those takeaways as well?
Oh yeah, like the skills that you learn from swimming, like I said, the earth we are majority water. So yeah, it's really interesting, because seeing a lot of people on the island, they actually didn't know how to swim. Nobody ever taught them how to swim, and they were actually scared of the ocean.
Really?
So a lot of the kids who didn't have parents and who took them to swim school, and it's not like here in Australia where it's mandatory. That's a luxury. Learning how to swim is a luxury. And some kids were self-learned. They went out and did it themselves. But yeah, you live on an island and you don't know how to swim. So
is fishing a big culture over there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of our national dishes is actually flying fish.
Really?
So, yeah. But I never fished.
Gotcha.
I didn't have the patience for that, unfortunately.
And so you said that competing was never a thing that you wanted to do with surfing. Why is that? Because you obviously loved it. Like, was there ever a thought about making a career out of it?
Yeah. So I competed with a lot of other sports. So not just swimming, I was doing dressage, horse riding.
Gotcha.
Thank
you for clarifying.
It's a horse rider.
Yeah.
I was also doing karate, grappling. I did running competitively. So there's a lot of competition going on outside of my surfing. And I think the only reason why I didn't go into competitive surfing is because I was never aware of it. I was never really aware that you could have surfing as a profession. That wasn't when Dad kind of taught us surfing and when we were introduced to surfing, it was more of you're out here, you're here to respect the ocean, respect the people that came before you, just appreciate being here in this moment. You are part of something that's bigger than you. It's very free surfing.
I love where your dad's head's at.
But yeah, the idea of competing in surfing was just never introduced. I didn't watch the WSL until I was like 18. And when I moved to Australia, so at about 15, and surfing's a massive part of the Sunshine Coast, the East Coast culture, it was almost, I don't want to say this, I was too late, but kids had been training from a young age. So my surfing it's very unrefined. It is, like, it's not someone who has been training their whole life and you learn techniques and skills, like I can handle myself and I can be out there. But yeah, there's definitely a technicality with surfing that I didn't harness from a young age. So I think I just kind of accepted that fact that maybe I was a little bit too late. I didn't want to. I was almost like fear of failure if I did get into it because I loved it so much and I didn't want to have that love tarnished.
I wonder how much of a fact of like junior development and like grassroots, like look at the AFLW now, NRLW, like a lot of the female sports, like the development's happening now, you know, but whereas historically it's probably 10 years ago, there wasn't that much there. I wonder what it would have looked like if you were here on the Gold Coast or if you were in a camp where there was, you know, training around and you could actually do a deep dive into that. I wonder if you would jump into it then, or maybe if the stubbornness would just come out. Don't tell me what to do. But you know what I mean, though. Like, yeah. I wonder if having a fostering environment, or if it's just like, because I look at you now as someone who's incredibly hardworking. Like, you're one of the most hardworking people that I know. But you take your time to get away, and surfing's a huge part of getting away. So maybe that's just the piece that it's just the getaway piece.
Yeah, no, I could have been so different. I'm fully
speaking for you, by the way.
No, it is so true. It could have been so different. I definitely think about that, like being able to have grown up in a community where, you know, you're watching surf movies and knowing the greats. And I didn't grow up with that. It was more through experience, through others. And also being a female in a very male dominated sport, like the idea that you could actually make a career out of surfing, being a female, was just, yeah, it would have been absurd to me back then. Do
you ever struggle with that out in the lineup now? Like, do you have any run-ins with crew?
Not anymore. I think we've gotten a lot better. In terms of when I was younger, it was just more like snide comments in between. It was more like, oh, when you were really, really young, come out of the back with like a man, surf like a man, or you surf pretty good for a girl. Like, little crude comments. My dad and I were actually having a giggle the other day because we had found my old gun I had when I was about 16. We went to Indo. We were going to Indo. Like
surfboard gun.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, what was Barbados like? You're rolling around with guns as a 15-year-old? I'm kidding. Yeah, gotcha. Sorry.
Surfboard gun, sorry. Yes. Technicalities. But yeah, we found it in the garage, and I was kind of reflecting on my experience buying it. So Dad and I had gone into the surf shop and we found it. I was trying to push myself a little bit more. We were going out in bigger waves. And it was this beautiful 6'6" Simon Anderson board. Now we were like, this is the one. And he had stepped away for a moment. And then I had the shop owner come up to me and he was like, oh, like, hi, darling, how are you? Like, being nice. And then he just pretty much said, oh, like, I don't think this is the board for you. And he's like, let me, like, find you something that's going to better suit your surfing and your style. And he pointed towards the softboards.
Gotcha.
Just the audacity. And, like, back then I didn't really understand and I kind of had a laugh. But, yeah, like, that would never happen to a guy.
But also never seen you surf, I'm assuming.
Yeah, no.
Just
making an assumption. And yeah, even back then, just not having the female support in the water, it was almost as if when there was another female in the water, it was a lot of comparison between the two of you because you're the only two and everyone else is guys. And yeah, whilst now I think, well, I really value female like companionship in the water. It's really nice to see because it's usually, even though the sport has a lot more females, it's usually 20 guys, 1 girl in the water.
Yeah. But it's also cool to see like the role models coming through now. And that's why I think social media is so great. Even like the WSL, like equal pay, like they're broadcasting the female and it's cool to watch. Yeah. Like, I love watching, like even growing up, I love watching surf movies like Craig Anderson, Dane, like even Ian, there's so many like great surf movies. And even now, like watching a lot of our friends like putting out docos and putting out short films, I'm like, that's so cool. And look at all like the young girls that are going to be coming up. Like, I want to surf like that. Like that's the, like, cause I imagine historically there wasn't someone, like you couldn't see it. And I don't think if you can't see it, you can't do it, right?
Yeah, no, the girls right now are doing insane things. I can't. It honestly like blows my mind. Just pipeline to Edie.
Oh my God.
Insane.
Yeah. I caught up with India Robinson the other day. Like she's such a legend and she surfs so good. She's telling me about a few of her heats and like it's just cool. It's cool to see like not only see them in the water but like get to know them as well and that whole piece.
And it's moving along like the following generations. Like the girls younger than 18, even down in the Mornington Peninsula in Victoria, they rip. They're just so good. Yeah, they're surfing amazingly and the technique is there. And they're more risk taking, whilst like traditionally we would have been construed as more risk adverse. Even my sister, who is probably one of the most risk adverse like people, she's like starting to charge a lot more. So she's in Indo at the moment and she just sent through like a video of her catching like a 7 to 8 foot wave and she's like tucked in, came out. She's got this big like grin on her face, like lanky limbs flying out.
That's so good.
But yeah.
What kind of waves do you like surfing? Like you said you wanted to push yourself growing up. Like what's the
then or now?
Both.
Now I'm very content with 4 foot.
Really? But not before?
Yeah, no, not before. I think before it was very much, I was really looking at how much I could push myself and it was both for myself and I think it also was like a bit of a trying to impress my dad and like it's part of that. But I loved the thrill of it. The thrill of just coming off of a bit of a bigger wave and you're just shaking. Like your whole body is, just the dopamine that's like running through you. There's no better feeling. And then having like your mates around you or family who are cheering you. Yeah. I definitely pushed myself a little bit when I was a bit younger. Like I mentioned before, I had a few injuries which has probably made me a bit more risk adverse now. I just don't want to get hurt again.
I think about this all the time because like, and this is probably leading into like the neuropsychology stuff. Like as we get older, we become so much more like conscious of risk. Like I remember when I went through this phase from like 18 to maybe like 22, 23, where I was jumping out of airplanes. Like I had my like skydiving license. I was riding motorbikes. Like I was playing this really aggressive style of footy, which has probably helped with all my concussions that I had. But it was just like, had no regard for my body. And And I was talking to my friend the other day about this, and I imagine it's because like at that time, like I was single, probably like super high testosterone, like just wanted to be like an alpha in a heavily male testosterone environment in rugby league. But then as you have a partner, and even if you get led down the track and have kids, like those real primal instincts kick in, and you have people to look after, and I know like your testosterone drops. How does that work in the female space? Like how is that something that like just naturally happens? Because it does, right?
Yeah, a lot of that has to do with brain development.
Yeah.
So our executive functioning, it is one of the last things to fully develop. So that's our frontal lobes. And that usually is fully developed. This is different depending on people, for let's just say about 24, 25. So during your adolescence, during your young adulthood, it's still developing. You're still like making those connections of what is risk-taking, what is risky risk-taking versus optimum risk-taking. We're a bit more impulsive. Our decisions can sometimes be construed as poor. We're more likely to be like make a decision like right on the spot rather than taking a step back and thinking about it. So yeah, it's all biological.
But I imagine you can float in and out of those types of things. Like I always just relate to myself, or even friends. Like I've seen friends do it. Like they've been in a relationship, they may or may not have kids, but when they come out of that relationship, it's like it's almost like they get their testosterone back and they're taking like more risk-taking behavior. And I always go back to testosterone, but is it a testosterone thing or is it just a biological thing?
I'm not really sure about the hormones involved in it and whether or not it would be different to females versus males. We know that males are a bit more risk-taking, whilst females are a bit more risk-adverse. But yeah, I wouldn't know the kind of hormone.
It's interesting.
Around it.
I think about it though, because it's just like we're changing. Like as we grow up and things are, and that kind of ties into like the neuropsychology. And I want to do a deep dive into this. And like, can you explain to me how, I guess, neuropsychology plays a part in sport and how it maybe differs from neuroscience?
Yeah, explaining neuropsychology is quite funny sometimes.
How long you've got?
I'm like, what do I do for a living?
Perfect example.
So a neuropsychologist is basically a psychologist that's an expert in brain impairment, neurological disorders. So we can sometimes see more dementias, Parkinson, epilepsy, traumatic brain injury. And then we're also what we call experts in cognition. So cognition, it's like your thinking skills. You've got very lower level cognitive skills, and that's like attention, working memory. So your ability to take in, hold information, manipulate it. And then you've got more higher level. So executive functioning, like I was mentioning before, your ability to kind of organize information, make decisions, inhibit responses. And then even your long-term memory, so ability to hold information and spit it out like a week later. So these brain like disorders, they actually have patterns in thinking. So you've got different strengths and weaknesses. So we use that data based off our tests as well as neuroimaging, and we can kind of assess and diagnose. And where it kind of fits into sports is less kind of focused on in Australia. It's more focused on in the US. So they have a lot of sports neuropsychs over there. And yeah, I'm just trying to lead the way here in Australia. But the reason why I wanted to do it and why I wanted to do it with sports is a neuropsychologist's role in something like a sport-related TBI could be to assess and diagnose.
So like a traumatic brain injury, getting a concussion in a game, I imagine. Yeah.
So concussion is probably what we deal with mainly in sport-related brain injury. And it's also about intervention afterwards. So how to rehabilitate someone after they have experienced these injuries, and whether that is, so if we think about thinking skills, let's think if you have a TBI, you might have a pothole in your highway. Yeah. And then are we going to fix the pothole, or are we going to take a detour? And those are the things we kind of determined. Are we going to be taking that detour, or are we going to be fixing it? So working with the athlete. And sometimes like it's not possible to fix the pothole, and we're going to have to find other methods. But yeah, I guess the outcome is the same.
Yeah. What sports are you mainly focusing on at the moment or looking at?
So because like in Australia, you can't really specialize because it's not really that much of a field in it. So within my placement, I'm actually not. I won't work with specifically athletes.
Gotcha.
I'll work with anyone. I'm actually in a acquired brain injury unit in a month's time. So right now I'm working with kiddos doing neurodevelopmental assessment. So working with like autism and ADHD, which I love. I love working with kiddos. But my ABI unit, I'll be working with pretty much your everyday Joe, anyone who kind of like experiences a TBI or a stroke, and then rehabilitation afterwards. So it's not specific to athletes, but that's my goal in the future, to do some consultancy work with sports teams after these injuries.
Would you go overseas?
I would.
Would you go over to the US?
I would consider it.
Yeah.
I think I would definitely consider it. They've just got like such a vast amount of knowledge over there in neuropsychs. They've just got a much bigger field, a lot of experts over there. Yeah, Michael McRae's, he works with the Packers. And yeah, there's a lot of amazing people who I really look up to, who it would be interesting to hear their perspective.
You just have to find a university that's close to the beach.
I know.
That's the only thing.
The caveats, right? That's wrong with surfing.
Yeah,
so many caveats.
100%. But then even like your PhD, like what, like you're still doing your PhD, you're almost finished. Where are you at with that?
Yeah, almost finished. I wish.
Yeah.
I am halfway through. So,
and can you describe what your PhD and what your thesis is?
Yeah, definitely. My PhD is in developing and piloting a sleep regularity and circadian alignment intervention. Sorry,
can you break that down for us average Joes?
Yeah, to improve mental health and mood in athletes. So yeah, it's basically sleep, circadian rhythms, and mental health in an athlete population. And the reason why we wanted to target sleep regularity and circadian alignment, I'll take a step back. Circadian rhythms, so circa around a day. So we've got these rhythms in our body and they kind of regulate our sleep and wake cycle. And our main circadian clock, it's located in the brain, in this area called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, in the anterior hypothalamus. So that kind of regulates when we want to wake up and when we want to go to sleep.
Yeah.
And misalignment, so we've got environmental inputs, and that can kind of affect our rhythms.
So think like drinking, getting up too early, stress maybe.
Yeah, it's more like, so light, we're most sensitive to light. Yeah. That is the most sensitive thing for the circadian clock, but it's also exercise, temperature. With light though, so we've got these photoreceptive ganglion cells in our eyes, and they signal down to the suprachiasmatic nucleus when daytime is and when nighttime is.
Gotcha.
And I guess based off our lifestyle, the Industrial Revolution, we've kind of shifted that based off our biology. So we're getting a lot more light during the night and a lot less light during the day. And there's been a lot of really great research currently have come out in literally the past 2 years that the more light exposure you get during the day, the less of a risk that you have of psychiatric disorders.
So is that just imagine being out in the sun or being outside instead of being cooped up all day?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
So the more light the light you get during the daytime, it's a correlation, right? So it's just a relationship, but the decreased risk of these different psychiatric disorders.
That's so interesting. And there's a few things that you said just then. You said exercise, sleep, light, and I kind of want to break these down because people that are listening, they're probably like, well, what can I do? You know what I mean? I was telling you had a really good conversation with Dr. Dean Miller. Yeah. One of the great men. And I was just like, well, and break it down for us. What can we do? And one of the big things that I took from that conversation was just turn off they call it the big light, so your main light in your room, for that exact thing, right? You don't want to be trying to wake up because that's going to wake up the receptors in your eyes. So am I close?
Yeah, you're very close. So you don't want light during the night because then you're telling your body that no, it's actually not time to sleep. So you're kind of misaligning the clock. But yeah, you made a great point. Dean said some really great things during that interview about just turning off, because some people are renting, right? Yep. We don't have dim lights in our household. Sometimes that's just not a feasible option. But for me, for example, like when I'm cooking, when I come home from work, I've got just one light on.
Really?
And my roommates will come home and they're like, Elie, I can't see. And they turn on every single light in the house. I'm like, no, you're going to misalign my circadian rhythms. Turn it off.
Yeah, really? Oh, that's so interesting.
So it's just the little things, right? And everyone has different sensitivities. So some people get really affected from light at night, and some people don't. Some people can be on their computer and get to sleep straight away. But I think if we're thinking about the majority, it is much better to get less light at night and more light during the day.
Just on that, because I can sleep anywhere. The few of the boys, we did a walk over the weekend for the Mark Hughes Foundation, like Beanies for Brain Cancer. It was like 150 Ks over 3 days. It was great. I'm still sore. But anyway, the boys laugh at me because they call me Sleep Grave. Like Michael Gordon, Mitch Rand, a few of the boys that I used to play footy with. Just because if we're having like a 10-minute break, I'll just go and have a 5-minute nap. And I could just be sitting here. And then even like we're in the studio now, even I've got my office just over here, and I'll work at night, but then I can go straight to sleep. Is that still affecting my sleep performance? Because I imagine the quality of a sleep is just as important.
Yeah, no, it can definitely affect your sleep quality. Yeah. Even though you think you're getting to sleep straight away, it can definitely still affect your sleep quality. But like I mentioned before, everyone has different sensitivities. So you can have one person. So for me, for example, if I'm not getting a lot of light during the day, I'm getting really moody. And that really does affect.
I've never seen you moody. I've known you for a little while now. You're always like the most positive person ever.
I can get so moody. If I haven't gone for a surf and I haven't seen light, yeah, I can definitely, I do notice my mood starts to dip. And there's a lot of research on that light and mood and how they kind of interact with each other. And I think that was the whole point of the intervention is can we kind of align someone's circadian rhythm what we're trying to do is we're actually trying to align your individual biological clock with the schedule. So I think Dean also mentioned keeping a consistent sleep scheduling.
Yes.
Yeah. So being able to actually put that into practice is probably a lot harder than it sounds. So what we're gonna try and do is we're gonna try and get the athletes keep a consistent sleep regularity schedule, as well as we're gonna test their DOMO, which is their dim light melatonin onset. Melatonin is just a hormone that signals to the brain that it's ready for bedtime.
And you can actually see how much melatonin they have?
Yeah, we can. And we can determine when your body wants to go to sleep.
Really?
Yeah. And if we can align that up, so if we can go, let's just say your body wants to go to sleep naturally at 10:30 and you're going to bed at 12:30, we can try and align that better so that you're not, like, I guess the whole idea of it is that you sleep better because your body's aligned better.
So if I come to you and I say, Elie, I want to know the best time for myself to go to sleep, you can essentially help us with that. And you can let us know. It's like, Keegs, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, this is going to be you. Mm-hmm. Really?
Yeah, there's a protocol involved in it.
Of course.
But we can. So we do like saliva sampling, and this is the most labby, I guess, my PhD gets, because a lot of it is real world, because I'm really interested in translatability, like what does it look like in real life, the ecological validity of the research that we do. But yeah, you can definitely do that. And there's definitely been a bunch of research that has done that before. A bunch of the guys in my lab have already tested that and looked at when someone's body wants to sleep versus when they are actually sleeping.
Can I change that? Can I say, like, if I am, say my time is 8 o'clock, right? And I constantly go to bed at 10 o'clock for the next 5 years. Is that going to change things?
Yeah, so we can change it. Yeah. We can shift. That's what we shift your circadian clock to either advance it or delay it. So if you need to be going to bed a little bit earlier, we can do that based off the environmental input. So one of the main things we will be doing is manipulating the timing of light.
Gotcha.
When like we put on the blue light blocking glasses, or when you're going to be exposed to light in the morning. Because if you're exposed to light earlier, naturally your body's going to want to go to bed earlier, and you're naturally going to want to wake up earlier.
So key takeaways, dim the lights before going to sleep. You mentioned blue blocking glasses.
Yeah, so this is just for the intervention.
Yeah. But
not everyone needs say that 3 times fast.
Blue
light blocking glasses.
Yeah. Not everyone does. So it's
not everyone needs
individualized.
it. Mm-hmm.
I want to do a deep dive into a few other things that you mentioned. You mentioned exercise.
Mm-hmm.
What is the role exercise plays in sleep and quality performance?
Yeah.
Sleep performance.
So my specialty is in exercise. One of the guys in my lab, he's done really interesting study with Whoop. I'm not going to speak to this too much because I will butcher it and I'll get in trouble for it.
Fair.
But Josh Leota, his paper is going to come out. He's done a lot of research on late night exercise and how that affects sleep quality, sleep duration, a whole bunch of sleep variables. And what he found was this dose response relationship. So the higher intensity your exercise is, the later it is, the worse your sleep is going to become. And this affects all sleep variables, sleep duration, sleep quality. So basically, I guess key takeaways is don't do your marathon at like 7 p.m. Try and do it at like 6 a.m. in the morning.
I'm going to ask you a question around saunas, and feel free, you can say you don't know, but if it's like, I do a sauna before going to bed, right? And I feel like I'm working pretty hard in that, like I might get to 100, my heart rate's at about 100, sorry. But this is like, I'm sweating and I feel like I'm working hard, but then I'll come out and my body temp will drop and I'll have the best sleeps. Is it different?
I mean, logistically, like it would make sense, right? Your body temperature wants to drop before you go to sleep. But yeah, I don't know too much about the recovery mechanisms around it. But what our plan is in the lab is, because we know that sometimes late night competition, it is just part of sports, right? It's part of viewership. We have to have it later in the night. Even combat sports, sometimes they're at like 12 o'clock at night just to kind of get viewership up. And that's just part of it, right? That is part of the profession and the career. Can we utilize recovery mechanisms such as saunas afterwards to reduce the impact that strain has on your sleep? So that is a TBC conversation.
Yeah, we'll have that later.
But I don't really have any data on that at the moment.
That's okay. The sleep, it's obviously super important, but how does it play into mental health? Like, what's the mental health piece of it?
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you mentioned this. So this is my bread and butter. I'm
glad you asked.
But yeah, so a lot of my research is really about improving mental health. And if I hate to throw the DSM out there, but the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, you would know, psychology.
Yep, sure. couple subjects in. I think we're still getting to that.
So pretty much like not all, but almost all of the mental health disorders, a symptom is disrupted sleep, right? And there is a really strong relationship for a bidirectional relationship. So disrupted sleep can cause mental health. And when you have mental health, you can also have disrupted sleep as a symptom. So there is that massive relationship between the two of them. And it's really important to be looking at both things. So that's kind of why I wanted to look into sleep and its effect on mental health, because we know that by improving sleep, based off the research, based off the theory, based off previous interventions, we can improve mental health. And sleep regularity, there's been a few studies that have shown that increased sleep regularity, so the more regular you sleep, the better health outcomes you'll have. So sleep regularity increased, reduced your risk of mortality.
Really?
Yeah. Insane.
And by mortality, you mean like all causes?
All causes, yeah.
It's like cancers, Alzheimer's, dementia, cardiovascular disease, like the whole thing.
Yeah. Insane.
Wow.
And because there was been like a massive conversation over the last, like, I don't know how many years in the sleep field about sleep duration being the most important, like, sleep variable. Like, just get your 10 hours of sleep, get to 8 to 10 hours of sleep. And now what we're noticing is that it's not just sleep duration, right? It's also how consistent your sleep is.
Like
And
the timings you go to bed, is that what you mean?
yeah. So when you're going to bed and when you're waking up. So trying to keep it as consistent as possible. And based off with the paper that they did, so they found that the top 20% were sleeping within 1 hour. So let's just say you're going to bed at 9 o'clock, so you're sleeping between 9 and 10 each night and waking up between 6 and 7.
Wow. There's so many questions that come out of this, and I don't know where to start. What do you think is the most common question that you get asked with your PhD?
A lot of it is actually not around the sleep. It's about the mental health and how we actually conceptualize it.
Yeah.
Because what I noticed with pursuing this type of research is that the idea of mental health is so wishy-washy in the literature and in conversations. People don't really understand the conceptualization of mental health. Like they call it well-being, or they call it like mental health disorders. And a lot of the research will target, so everything I just mentioned, targeted mental health disorders.
Yeah.
So targeted psychiatric illnesses, anxiety, depression.
We're talking about mental illness here.
Yeah, mental illness. Because I understand, like it's an ease to research when you can just go, oh, they have an absence of this, so it equals this. And it's a lot harder to capture a multidimensional construct such as mental health, where mental illness is only one factor of it. Gotcha. Mental health is so many other things, right? It's a social aspect of it. There's an identity aspect. There's this balance and autonomy.
I was going to ask, like, how do you break those things down? Because it is such a complex issue. It's like it's multifactorial. Like there's multiple layers, right? And how do you pick the one, or is it just saying mental illness? Like we're talking about anxiety, depression, psychosis. Like, is that what you mean?
Yeah. So that's kind of why I wanted to do some of the research on mental health as a whole from an athlete's perspective. Because like you said, there's so many different factors, and how do you pick from it? You'll end up doing a billion different questionnaires, and no athlete has time to do that. Yeah. So within our lab, we're actually creating a new mental health scale to capture the essence of mental health from an athlete's perspective. Yeah. So using the athlete's language to capture each of those factors. And then hopefully we can find a measurement that will look at social, that will look at autonomy, that will look at balance, and will also look at absence of mental health, mental illness.
Would that include the things that most athletes are going through on a day-to-day basis? So it might be, I don't know, pressure, like you mentioned, anxiety, community. Like, is that some of the things that you'll look to target with athletes?
Yeah, definitely. So it is an athlete-specific measurement because mental health doesn't discriminate, right? It affects all of us. So what we wanted to do was target things that an athlete resonates with more. So using their language, what they think is most pertinent. So I did some interviews with the athletes, trying to define mental health better and trying to understand it, both for this scale and for one of my papers. And a lot of the language was about, there's a lot of social stuff, things that we know already. But some of the things that really stood out was this idea of regularity, trying to keep a regular routine, also decision making. Yeah. Like if I'm making good decisions in life, I'm making good decisions on the field or in the water or on the snow. And they're also backing their decisions. Yeah. Even if it's something as simple as, oh, like I ate like 2 eggs this morning and I didn't eat that donut. And if for them that's a big value, then even if they lost during a game or during a comp, they're thinking, okay, I actually made good decisions. Like this was just, there's other variables involved in me losing, but I did everything I needed to do.
That's so cool. I can obviously only speak from lived experience and talking to crew. And what I found is that when athletes are more happy off the field, they're way more likely to have positive results on the field. Is that something that you're seeing?
Yeah, well, it trickles, right? Like I've spoken to everyone about it because I really wanted to understand that as well. I was like, how is Michael Phelps winning all of this? Yeah, with like still suffering from depression and a lot of mental illnesses. And what a lot of athletes told me was that you can do it, like one game, one comp. Yes, you can kind of push through and leave it behind, but it's just not sustainable. You're going to eventually see a breakdown. So if we're thinking about long-lived careers, no, it's not sustainable if you have poor mental health. Your performance is going to take the brunt of it.
But then also like those crew who have had success for such long periods of time, like I think Barty, like she's a perfect example, and she's done a lot of work with a guy called Ben Crow. Do you know Ben Crow? Mojo Crow. He's like a kind of like a mindset coach, worked with Nike forever, but more in the commercial space, then moved over to mindset. And he's worked with Ash forever, and they talk about identity and taking that piece away. And I spoke to a good friend of mine, Paddy Carrigan, who's a leader at the Brisbane Broncos, and he's also worked with Ben, and he's just like, when I stop putting myself to the loss, right? Like say Paddy talked about on the podcast, he's been on the podcast, when I lose a game, I don't want to go out. You know, I don't want to go out in public because people are staring at him, people are saying like, and he's attached himself to the loss. But then what Ben talks about, and Ash talks about it as well, it's like removing that part of it. And it's just like, no, I'm still the same person. I think Ash did a post-match interview, or maybe it was a pre-match before one of the big tournaments coming up. And they're like, oh, you've got like so much pressure. You're like, what if you don't win? Like, what happens with that? And she's just like, no, that's your expectation. Like my expectation, I was like, I can only control what I can control. Like
Control the controllables.
Control the controllables. Like I'm going to go out there and play to the best of my ability. I might go up in the day or rock up in the day and there might be someone better than me. I can't control that. I might get the bad bounce of the ball. It's just the way it is. And I'm not going to attach myself to that. And Ben was saying, he's like, when I heard that interview, it was so cool. I was like, she gets it. It just described perfectly.
No, it is. Identity is such an important part of the sport. And I think when something like injury or losses threatens the identity, it's really about like everything else that's kind of cushioning you around you to keep you going. Because injury has massive effects on how you kind of cope and how you kind of move through that.
Yeah. Do you think much around like values, like living your, like we talked earlier about living in your purpose, and we talked about when you have energy and when you're talking about something, you have that energy and it's infectious, right? Like even talking to, I've spoken about it before, talking to people who are super successful, like even on the Gold Coast, I feel like everyone, not everyone here, maybe it's just the circles we knock around in, but everyone that they're doing cool things, like whether it's owning restaurants and cafes and clothing brands, or, you know, successful in their respectable sport. Everyone's going for it. And a lot of people, it seems like they're in a flow. Is that something that you guys, and I imagine it's because it's in tune with their values, like, me personally, like the last 12 months, maybe 18 months, I've sort of leaned more into the psychology space. I've had a lot of conversations with you over the time, which I thank you for. But mental health has been a huge, I guess, passion of mine forever. Like been involved with Movember for over 8 years. Like always wanted to be that guy that mates could talk to in a very macho, brave environment. So it's always been a passion. And now I'm like, oh, what does that look like? Started the podcast and I started studying psychology and now working with past players. It's like, that's now aligned with my values. And I feel obviously like happier. It seems to be working. I'm in a flow. Heaps of opportunities are happening. But is that something that you guys are aware of or looking at, or even just you personally? It doesn't have to be like PhD aside, just you personally. Is that something that you think about? Yeah,
I love the word flow. I was trying to incorporate it within the scale I was doing. I was like, how do I use this language? Just so they can be like, yes, no, that's what I mean. So yeah, flow comes up quite a lot, but there's two different aspects of flow, right? There's flow states and performance. Yes. And then there's also flow, like life is just easy. Life is just flowing. But yeah, like you mentioned, the values and alignment, I don't think that is separate from the human condition though. I think that's very much just part of being human and needing a purpose.
Do you think you're on a flow at the moment?
Am I on a flow? Sometimes it feels like I get stuck in my 20-page pediatric report. But yeah, no, definitely. I think just like you mentioned before, I really take the time to prioritize things that are good for my mental health. And
yeah, what are those things? I'd love to know the things that you prioritize. The long
drives to the Mornington Peninsula.
Yeah, just to surf.
Yeah, just like getting out. For me, very much getting out, being out in nature, being by the water, connecting with people who have that shared enjoyment and understanding of the ocean. And yeah, I think that for me is pretty special. Coming home, seeing my family, dad just whooped my ass in chess last night. But just those moments that you can have with your parents. When my brother came down, and I'm now going to see like all of my best friends here on the Gold Coast. Going to see you. Yeah, just those conversations. And yeah, it's so many little things, but everyone's cup is different, right? So something that works for me is not going to work for everyone. So generalizing things that are good for your mental health, it is really tricky, because I've got some people in my cohort who hate the water. There is no way. They think I'm crazy. I'm known as the crazy one. So yeah, everyone has a different thing that fills their cup, and it's about having the self-awareness to find out what fills their cup and doing that for them, not doing it for anyone else.
How do you think you find that?
I think it's just a lot of time spent with yourself, to be honest. I know some people find it really tricky to be by themselves, but there's a lot of value in it. There's a lot of value in not making those comparisons like, oh, that person, this makes this person happy. And then sometimes we automatically assume it's going to make us happy. Like run clubs.
You're not jumping in any run
No,
clubs?
I'm a runner. I'm a runner. But I know some people don't like runs, and it's okay. You don't have to
They might just be looking to date though. Isn't it the new dating scene?
New dating app.
Elle, I know that you're obviously you're constantly learning. Like you're constantly doing your bunch of stuff. Is there something that you've learned recently that's really sparked an interest, or that you'd be like, oh my God, like that is so sick to know? Is there anything recently that's popped up?
What's popped up? I feel like I had these conversations with my supervisors in like the pediatric placement I'm doing, just working with kiddos and trying to understand kiddos. And I feel like there's so many little tidbits that kind of comes with that. But the way I explained mental health to a parent the other day, and it resonated with them. So I guess I can kind of talk about that here. So let's just say you've got two kiddos, and they've both like scraped their knee, right? One kid, he's got a lot of family around them. His mom is maybe a nurse and knows that you've got to like stitch up the cut. You've got to clean it. You got to put a bandage over it. He's not going to go and play footy. He's going to take it easy. And the cut heals up all in a month. It's all fine and dandy. He's off doing whatever he wants to do. And then you've got another kiddo who, you know, parents aren't really around. They didn't notice the cut. He doesn't really have the education to know that he has to clean it. And then it gets infected. He's also quite malnourished. He doesn't have a good immune system. And then suddenly he gets really sick. And two kiddos, same fall, same age, very different outcomes a year later. So I think like explaining that to the parent and getting them to understand these different things can happen based off the different things in our environment. And just really understanding the privilege. So I guess it was more about like gratitude and privilege and trying to find those protective factors. How do we make things a little bit easier for other people? So we cushion the fall and we give them the education so that they don't have to rely on other people to know that their cut's infected. And that's just a metaphor, right? That's a metaphor for mental health challenges. Everyone can experience these mental health challenges. They're just part of life, but it's who we have around us, what supports we have in place to make sure that we can kind of patch it up.
Oh, that connection piece. I love that. I love that you mentioned that, because that's, to be honest, that's how the name kind of came up, because we were talking about the name and it's like, well, what's great for our mental health? And it's like, well, it's the community. It's the people you hang out with. It's the company. It's like the company you keep.
The company
it's like Keegan and Company, Keegan and Company, the company you keep.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I love that. And you can feel it. Like you're coming back home, right? I imagine you're like, these are my people. Yeah?
I was grinning so much this morning. My dad was like, "Why do you look so stupid?" It's like 6 a.m. in the morning. I was like, big grin on my face. I was like, I'm seeing my best friends today.
Yeah, Elle, when are you coming back? Like you've done a great little stint in Melbourne. When are you coming to the Goldie or Sunny Coast?
When am I coming back? I'm coming back in October, actually. I've just submitted an abstract for a conference. It's a sleep conference.
Yeah.
And they did it in Adelaide last year. It was my first conference. And they've got one in Gold Coast this year.
Sick.
So I'll probably present my protocol for the intervention, given that they accepted. Please accept it. So I'll be back then, I think.
But in terms of living, like it could be anywhere. Like you could be in Melbourne, you could be in like US, like you could just follow it around for the next couple of years, yeah?
Who knows? Honestly, like I'm just seeing where things take me. I've always just bounced around. I don't think I've ever been in one place Barbados, but I was bouncing around through there, but
also a
for
child.
more than 5 years. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was a kid. But yeah, I've bounced around a lot of places, Sunny Coast, Gold Coast, did like a stint in Africa.
I didn't know about this. We'll save that for offline.
Save that for another one. And then here in Melbourne, and I don't know, just bouncing around, you meet new people, you've actually got to put yourself out there. Sometimes you can get quite comfortable, which is quite nice.
Yeah.
We do love comfort and familiarity. But yeah, I think I'm a bit younger and I can still challenge myself. And yeah, the more you move around, the more people you meet, and the more, I guess, the more knowledge you get.
Absolutely. I asked the question about what you've learnt recently is because I learned something pretty cool today, or I listened to something cool.
You
today.
wanted me to ask the question about
No, I did. No, well,
sorry.
I was circling back because I do want to sort of understand it from a neuropsychology point of view, if there is even a way to it. But it's when sometimes you're just having a bad day.
Yeah.
You're in a bad mood. People just like, I'm just having I'm just in a bad mood. But can we just choose to be in a good mood? Like, if we can choose to be in a bad mood, can we just choose to be in a good mood? It's because and the way they framed it, it was just, and that's how they framed it. They framed it, if you can choose to be in a bad mood, just choose to be in a good mood. And then I was thinking about it, and I was like, I think I could. I generally, like, if you no reason, like, say, nothing pressing or nothing crazy is happening in your life, but you just woke up on the wrong side of the bed, you just wake up and you're just like, hey, it's a bad day. But what if you just woke up and was like, nah, it's going to be a good day. I'm just going to go for a little dive in the ocean. I'm going to see sunrise. Like, get to see my mates later on. I'm working with good crew. Like, I don't know. I think about that all the time. Like, is that something that we can just like switch?
Positive reframing is very tricky.
Really?
It's extremely
positive
hard.
Reframing. I love this. Tell me about positive reframing before we wrap things up. Tell me.
But yeah, it's literally doing exactly what you just said. It's just being like, there's this thought in my head, or there's this behavior that just happened, and I'm going to reframe it to a more helpful viewpoint. And that's tricky. That takes people years of psychology practice.
Is it a learned thing?
It's a learned thing. Well, some people do it based off like the things around them, so the environment around them, how they were kind of taught. But for a lot of people, that's really tricky. And mood is a transient state, right? It's constantly fluctuating based off different inputs, it can be as simple as a menstrual cycle. Menstrual cycle can affect your mood if you're a female. So it is constantly fluctuating, and to positively reframe thoughts, like, it is a lot harder said than done. So being able to do that, good on you.
Well, I do the grateful thing. Like, the Gratefuls, you might have seen the Gratefuls. I think you're going to be on my Gratefuls today, amongst other things. But like, that's, who was it? Hugh Van Cuylenberg. Hugh, Resilience Project.
Yeah.
I heard about, they say, write down 3 things that you're grateful for every day for 21 days, and it will like change your output on life. And I was very skeptical at the time, but then he was saying like Dustin Martin does it, and a heap of these athletes do it. And so I was like, I'll just trial it. I was coming off the back of a few injuries, so I might have been kicking stones a little bit. I remember doing it, and I did it for ages afterwards. And yes, I go through times where you don't do it and you do it and you don't do it. And then I caught up with Cooper Chapman, who's also a professional surfer, former professional surfer, and he does a lot in the mental health space. And he was doing it, and it just sparked me to get back into it. And now I do it. I still do it. And that's why I put it up on my socials, because I get a lot of crew saying, "Oh, when I see yours, like I do mine," and that's the reason
Positive
I do
influence,
it.
yeah.
I was like, imagine doing that over like 5-10 years. That's just got to build. I just got to stack days and build habits.
Yeah, habits are so important. Unfortunately, I don't do that. Meditating and journaling. It takes me a while to get into, and it's never really stuck for me. But I practice gratitudes in different ways, right? It's all about stepping back. For me, practicing gratitude is being out in nature and and being in that. I guess I am kind of being mindful, because I'm not really thinking anything. I'm just, embracing, grounding, feeling the ocean, hearing the waves, all those little techniques, which I've kind of harnessed by how much time I've spent out here by myself. Sometimes you get a little bit bored. But so it's every technique works for different people. So it's never one shoe fits everyone else, right?
Gotcha. Hey, Elle, I was just looking at my
time to
notes
wrap
there. I was looking at my notes and I was like, I think we got through like a third of what I wanted to talk about today. There's so many great topics, and like I was thinking in the lead up to this conversation, I was like, just going back through like all these conversations that we have, and like there's just been so many great ones, and I know I wanted to pick out the parts that I think would like most resonate with the audience, and I think there's been so many great takeaways. So I'm incredibly grateful. So thank you so much for coming on. I knew this was going to be fun. Like I knew, because obviously like you're a dear friend of mine. We've got some amazing conversations, and you're just doing incredible things, like especially in the whole like mental health space. And so I thank you for that. And I can't wait to see what the next 10, 20 years is going to look like for you, because it's going to be exciting.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on. Like I said before, I'm honored to be a part of it. Yeah, I've said this before, but I love what you're doing in this space. Just like creating awareness, sharing education, also having like the safe space to share experiences, reflections and sacrifices. Yeah, it's so important. And yeah, it's a really powerful thing, bringing community together.
Let's wrap it up. Thank you, Elie. Thank you so much.